"She killed him, Harry," my wife screamed, pointing at our daughter-in-law at Tim's funeral. "Rebecca murdered our son." But everyone looked at Eleanor like she'd lost her mind, and Rebecca collapsed into sobs, playing the grieving widow perfectly. 3 days later, Rebecca collected $750,000 from Tim's life insurance and told me I had 30 days to find another place to live. I was 59 years old, and I believed I'd failed my son by being too controlling, until I went to clear out his apartment and discovered something that changed everything. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 59 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew my family. I spent 30 years as an insurance fraud investigator before retiring last year, which means I made my living catching liars and thieves. You'd think that would make me smart enough to spot the predator sleeping under my own roof, but you'd be wrong. Tim was my only son. 34 years old, worked in government IT security, the kind of guy who could hack into anything but was too honest to ever abuse it. He married Rebecca Torres 6 years ago, and I walked her down the aisle because her father had passed. She was 23 then, beautiful, sweet, called me Dad Harry from day one. Eleanor and I loved her like the daughter we never had. Rebecca was everything you'd want in a daughter-in-law. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, always remembered birthdays and anniversaries. When Tim brought her home that first time, she helped Eleanor in the kitchen, asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested in our lives. After they married, she'd call me for advice about everything from car repairs to investment options. I was proud to be her father figure. Tim seemed happy. They bought a nice house in the suburbs, talked about kids someday. Rebecca quit her pharmaceutical job after a few years, said she wanted to focus on being a wife and maybe start a family. Tim supported her completely. He was making good money in IT security, and they seemed financially comfortable. But looking back now, I should have noticed things, like how Rebecca always had an excuse when we invited them for family dinners, or how Tim started looking tired all the time, complained about chest pains and shortness of breath. Rebecca was always so concerned, always pushing him to see doctors, but they kept saying it was stress from work. The pharmaceutical background should have been a red flag. Rebecca knew medications, understood how they worked, had connections in the medical supply chain. But she played it perfectly, always deferring to doctors, always seeming worried about Tim's health. She'd call me after every medical appointment, updating me on what the doctors said, how concerned she was. I remember one conversation about 8 months before Tim died. Rebecca called me at home, crying. "Dad, Harry, I'm so scared. Tim's having chest pains again, and the doctors can't find anything wrong. What if it's genetic? What if he inherited something from your family?" I reassured her, told her heart problems did run in our family, but Tim was young and healthy. I even recommended he get a full cardiac workup, suggested she take him to specialists. Rebecca thanked me, said she was going to insist Tim take better care of himself. Looking back, that conversation was probably when she started planning his murder in earnest. I'd just given her the perfect cover story. Genetic heart problems, family history, unexplained symptoms that doctors couldn't diagnose. She was setting up the narrative months in advance. The morning my phone rang at 6:30 a.m., I knew something was wrong. It was Rebecca, hysterical. "Dad, Harry, you need to come to the hospital right now. It's Tim. He had a massive heart attack. He's gone." When Eleanor and I got to the hospital, Rebecca was in the hallway, still in her pajamas, makeup smeared from crying. She threw herself into my arms. I tried CPR. I called 911 immediately, but it was too late. The doctor said his heart just gave out. The doctor explained that Tim had suffered what they called sudden cardiac death, said it happens sometimes to young, seemingly healthy people. Genetic predisposition, stress, lifestyle factors. They didn't see any need for an autopsy since Rebecca had witnessed the heart attack and called for help immediately. Dr. Nathan Pierce, our family physician for 15 years, was the one who signed the death certificate. Natural causes. I stood there looking at my son's body and felt like my world had collapsed. Tim was only 34. Yeah, I knew heart disease ran in my family, but he was young, he exercised, he didn't smoke. It didn't make sense, but the doctors seemed confident. Sudden cardiac death in young adults wasn't unheard of. Rebecca's performance at the hospital was flawless. She answered every question the medical staff asked, provided Tim's medical history, explained how she'd found him collapsed in their bedroom that morning. She was the picture of a devastated young widow, and everyone felt sorry for her. The funeral was 3 days later. Rebecca played the perfect grieving widow, black dress, supported by her sister Carmen, barely able to stand. The whole congregation looked at her with such sympathy. She gave a beautiful eulogy about how much Tim loved his family, how proud he was of his father's career, how he'd talked about following in my footsteps in some way. And then, just as they were lowering the casket, Eleanor snapped. She pointed at Rebecca and screamed, "She killed him! I know she did! Rebecca murdered our son!" The silence was deafening. Everyone stared at Eleanor like she'd lost her mind. Rebecca collapsed, wailing, "How can you say that? I love Tim more than life itself." People rushed to comfort Rebecca, while giving Eleanor and me disgusted looks, like we were monsters for attacking a grieving widow. Rebecca's sister Carmen got in Eleanor's face. "How dare you? Rebecca did everything for Tim. She took care of him when he was sick. She called the ambulance. She tried to save him." Even our own friends seemed embarrassed by Eleanor's outburst. Pastor Williams from our church actually put his hand on my shoulder and suggested Eleanor might need professional help dealing with her grief. I drove Eleanor home in complete silence. She sat next to me, trembling. Finally, she whispered, "Harry, I know how it sounded, but something's not right. I've felt it for months. The way Rebecca looks at us sometimes when she thinks we're not watching, cold, calculating." But I was too destroyed to listen. I told Eleanor she was grieving, that she needed to apologize to Rebecca. My son was dead, and now my wife was having some kind of breakdown. I felt like I was losing everything. My 30 years of investigative experience meant nothing when it came to my own family. I was just a broken father who'd failed his son. A week later, Rebecca called. Her voice was different, more businesslike. "Dad, Harry, I got the call from the insurance company. Tim's life insurance paid out, $750,000. I'm the sole beneficiary." Something in her tone bothered me, but I pushed it aside. Of course she was the beneficiary. She was his wife. But there was something almost pleased in her voice, like she was announcing good news rather than discussing her dead husband's insurance money. 2 weeks after the funeral, Rebecca showed up at our door with papers and a lawyer I'd never met. "I'm sorry, but I need you to know that Tim left a detailed letter explaining how he never forgave you for being so controlling throughout his life. My attorney says with this evidence and witnesses who heard Eleanor's accusations at the funeral, I can prove psychological harassment." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca's voice was ice cold now. "Tim documented years of your controlling behavior, how you criticized his career choices, questioned his decisions, even made him feel like he had to prove himself, constantly. The stress you put on him contributed to his death. My lawyer says I have grounds to claim you're partially responsible." This wasn't the Rebecca I knew. This was a stranger wearing her face. The sweet young woman who used to call me for fatherly advice had been replaced by someone calculating and cruel. "You have two choices," she continued. "You can fight this in court, and I'll make sure everyone knows how your control and criticism killed your own son. Or you can accept that this is what Tim wanted and move on quietly." Eleanor came to the doorway behind me. Rebecca looked at her with pure contempt. "And you, Eleanor, with your crazy accusations at the funeral. Everyone saw how unstable you are. That won't look good in court either." I felt like I was drowning. My son was dead. My wife was being painted as mentally ill. And the young woman I'd loved like a daughter was threatening to destroy us. I didn't have the strength to fight. My investigative instincts honed. Over 30 years of catching fraudsters were completely shut down by grief and guilt. Eleanor and I moved in with her sister temporarily. I started drinking heavily, something I'd never done before. Jack Daniels became my best friend. I'd wake up at noon, drink until I passed out, repeat. Eleanor tried to talk to me, but I couldn't hear her through the fog of alcohol and guilt. 6 weeks into this nightmare, I got a call from Tim's landlord. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Tim owned his house with Rebecca, but this man was calling about an apartment. "Mr. Bennett, this is Craig Murphy. I own the apartment complex on Maple Street. Your son Tim had been renting a studio apartment here for the past 6 months. I need someone to collect his belongings." I sobered up real fast. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. My son lived with his wife in their house on Oak Avenue." "No, sir, Unit 412. He paid rent every month cash, said he needed a private workspace for some IT consulting projects, but I need someone to clear it out. My investigative training kicked in for the first time since Tim's death. Why would my son need a secret apartment? Why pay cash? Why not tell his family about IT consulting work? I drove over there immediately, my head spinning. When I got to Unit 412 and used the key the landlord gave me, I walked into what looked like a command center. 3 computer monitors, high-end surveillance equipment, cables everywhere, professional-grade recording devices, the kind law enforcement used for undercover operations. This wasn't some casual IT consulting setup. This was an investigation headquarters. But what caught my attention were the dozens of external hard drives carefully labeled with dates going back 6 months. And on the desk, a note in Tim's handwriting. Dad, if something happens to me, check the drive labeled Truth. The password is your badge number. My hands shook as I found that drive and plugged it in. My old badge number from my insurance investigation days was 2847. The drive opened and I found myself looking at a folder full of video files, audio recordings, and documents organized with the precision of a trained investigator. The first video was dated 3 months before Tim died. It showed him looking directly into the camera and he looked terrible, thin, pale, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Dad, if you're watching this, something happened to me. And if it did, it wasn't natural. Rebecca is poisoning me. The world stopped. I replayed those words 3 times before they sank in. My son, my brilliant, methodical son, was telling me his wife was murdering him. Tim continued, I started getting sick about a year ago. Heart palpitations, weakness, shortness of breath. Rebecca was so concerned, always taking me to doctors, but they couldn't find anything wrong. Then I started noticing patterns. He held up a small device. I installed hidden cameras in our house 6 months ago. The same time I rented this apartment. What I found will shock you, Dad. But more than that, it's going to make you understand that everything Rebecca told you about my death was planned months in advance. The next files were security footage from inside Tim and Rebecca's house. High-definition video from multiple angles. Audio so clear I could hear whispered conversations. I watched my daughter-in-law, the woman I'd walked down the aisle, methodically crushing pills with a mortar and pestle every morning for weeks. The timestamps showed this happened dozens of times over 4 months. Rebecca would crush the pills into a fine powder, then stir the powder into Tim's coffee. The same coffee mug every morning, the one with his college logo that he always used. She'd smile and kiss him goodbye as he drank his own poison. But that wasn't the worst part. The next video showed Rebecca on the phone, and the recording equipment Tim had installed captured both sides of the conversation clearly. Kyle, baby, it won't be much longer now. The specialist I consulted estimates Tim's heart will give out within the next month based on the dosage I'm giving him. My blood ran cold. Kyle Morrison. I knew that name. He was a personal trainer at Rebecca's gym. Young guy, maybe 25, the kind of cocky kid who thought older men like me were just obstacles. Rebecca's voice continued. Once Tim's dead and I collect the insurance money, we can be together openly. $750,000 is enough for us to start fresh anywhere we want. Maybe California, maybe even overseas. Kyle's voice. What about his parents? They seem pretty attached to you. Won't they be suspicious? Rebecca laughed. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before, cold and calculating. Harry and Eleanor, please. Harry's a washed-up old investigator who thinks he knows everything, but he can't see what's right under his nose. And Eleanor's already emotionally unstable. Once Tim dies and I start spreading stories about how Harry's controlling, nature contributed to his son's stress-related heart attack, they'll be too busy defending themselves to cause problems. I had to pause the video. I ran to the apartment's bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. The woman I'd trusted, the woman I'd loved like my own daughter, had murdered my son for money and was planning to frame me for it. There were more videos. Rebecca meeting with Kyle at hotels, planning their future with Tim's insurance money. Rebecca researching untraceable heart medications online, using her pharmaceutical industry contacts. Rebecca practicing her grief-stricken widow performance in front of a mirror, rehearsing her tears, perfecting her devastated expression. One video showed Rebecca meeting with Dr. Nathan Pierce, our family physician. in what looked like a private medical office after hours. The audio was crystal clear. "Nathan, you know what I need," Rebecca said. "The pills have to be undetectable in a routine autopsy, and there won't be a full autopsy if you sign the certificate declaring natural causes." Dr. Pierce looked nervous, uncomfortable. "Rebecca, this is insane. If anyone finds out..." "Remember what happened at General Hospital 5 years ago?" Rebecca's voice turned cold. "The opioid prescriptions you wrote for patients who didn't exist? The DEA investigation that somehow went away? I made that disappear, Nathan. I had connections in pharmaceutical oversight who owed me favors. Help me with this, and we're even. Refuse, and I'll make sure the DEA gets every detail of what you did." Dr. Pierce collapsed into his chair. "Fine, but after this, we're done. I never want to see you again." The most devastating was a recording from the night before Tim died. Rebecca and Kyle in Tim's home office, going through his life insurance policy and bank statements. "Everything's in place," Rebecca said. "I'll give him the final dose tonight. By morning, his heart will stop. I'll call 911, perform CPR until the paramedics arrive, play the devastated wife. Nathan's already prepared to sign the death certificate without an autopsy." Kyle asked, "What about his parents' money? That old man must have a decent retirement saved up." "One step at a time," Rebecca replied. "First, I get the insurance money and Tim's inheritance. Then I'll work on getting Harold and Eleanor out of their house. I've already planted the seeds about Harold being controlling and Eleanor being unstable. Once they're isolated and broke, I can manipulate them into signing over their assets before they die." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse, but I kept clicking through files. Tim had been incredibly thorough. He documented everything, built an airtight case against his own wife while she slowly murdered him. The final video was Tim's last message, recorded just hours before he died. He looked terrible, sweating, struggling to breathe. "Dad, I can feel my heart failing. Rebecca gave me something. Tonight, I know it. I'm too weak to get to a hospital, and even if I could, Dr. Pierce would just cover for her. But I got it all on camera. Every crime, every conversation, every plan." Tim looked directly into the camera, and his next words broke my heart. "I love you, Dad. I know you think you failed me somehow, but you didn't. You taught me to be methodical, to gather evidence, to build airtight cases. You taught me to protect the people I love, even when it costs everything." He coughed, a painful sound. "I'm protecting you and Mom the only way I can now. Rebecca planned to destroy you both after she killed me, but she won't get the chance. Don't let her get away with this." The video ended with Tim explaining his backup systems. If he missed his weekly check-in with the apartment landlord, Craig Murphy would contact me. All the evidence was stored in multiple locations. Tim had even sent encrypted copies to a trusted colleague at his government job with instructions to turn everything over to law enforcement if anything happened to him. I sat in that apartment for hours, going through everything systematically. Tim had spent his final 6 months building an airtight case against Rebecca while she poisoned him daily. He'd used his government ET security training to create an investigation that would have impressed any law enforcement agency. Bank records showed Rebecca had been researching heart medications online, making small purchases from overseas pharmaceutical suppliers. She'd used her industry connections to obtain digitoxin, a heart medication that mimics natural cardiac arrest when given in large doses over time. Email records showed months of planning between Rebecca and Kyle. They'd researched life insurance policies, discussed the best ways to avoid suspicion, even planned their post-murder vacation to celebrate. Kyle had already quit his job at the gym and was waiting for Rebecca to collect the insurance money. Phone records showed Rebecca had been in contact with Dr. Pierce for months, not about Tim's medical care, but about the best ways to make murder look like natural death. Pierce had provided detailed information about autopsy procedures, what toxins were typically tested for, and how to ensure a death certificate would be signed without further investigation. The most chilling evidence was Rebecca's practice recordings. Tim had hidden cameras in multiple rooms, and they'd captured Rebecca rehearsing her reactions to Tim's death. She'd practiced her 911 call, her CPR attempts, her conversations with medical personnel. Every aspect of her performance at the hospital had been planned and practiced. I called Eleanor from the apartment. "Pack a bag. We're going to Gerald Coleman's office right now. Gerald had been my lawyer for 20 years, handled our wills, real estate, everything. When I showed him Tim's evidence, his face went white. Harry, this is ironclad. Murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, blackmail, all of it documented with multiple sources. But we need to be careful about how we proceed. Rebecca's smart, and she's had time to cover her tracks. We spent the next 4 hours going through every piece of evidence. Gerald brought in his paralegal and his investigator, and we organized everything into a comprehensive case file. Tim's work was so thorough that Gerald said it was better than most police investigations he'd seen. The question, Gerald said, is how we proceed. We could go straight to the police, but I think we should contact Detective Lisa Thompson first. You worked with her during your insurance investigation days, didn't you? Lisa Thompson was one of the best detectives in the city, someone I'd collaborated with on several major fraud cases. She was thorough, aggressive, and she understood how financial crimes worked. If anyone could handle a case this complex, it was Lisa. I called Lisa that evening. She agreed to meet us the next morning at her office. When we showed her Tim's evidence, she was quiet for a long time, going through videos and documents with the methodical attention of a seasoned investigator. Harry, she finally said, your son did incredible work. This is one of the most comprehensive criminal cases I've ever seen. But I want to add one more element before we make arrests. What's that? Lisa smiled grimly. I want Rebecca to confess on tape. With evidence this solid, we can afford to be patient. Let her think she's gotten away with it completely. Sometimes the smartest criminals make their biggest mistakes when they feel safe. Here's what we did. I called Rebecca and asked if we could have dinner, just the three of us, Eleanor, Rebecca, and me. I told her I'd been thinking about what she said, about how my controlling behavior might have contributed to Tim's stress and death. I said I wanted to make things right, maybe even help her start fresh somewhere else. Rebecca agreed immediately, probably thinking she'd finally broken me down completely. Her voice on the phone was different, more confident. She even suggested the restaurant, Tim's favorite place, which should have been a red flag about her true feelings. We met at Rosario's Italian restaurant on a Wednesday evening. I wore a wire provided by Detective Thompson's team, a device so small and sophisticated it was undetectable. Rebecca showed up looking beautiful, well-dressed, like a woman ready to start a new life with her insurance money. Dad Harry, she said, hugging me, I'm so glad you called. I know this has been hard on all of us, but I think Tim would want us to move forward. I played my role perfectly, the broken father accepting responsibility for his son's death. Rebecca, I've been doing a lot of thinking about Tim, about what you said regarding my behavior. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was too controlling, too critical. Rebecca's eyes lit up with satisfaction. I'm just happy you can see it now. Tim loved you so much, but the stress of trying to live up to your expectations was literally killing him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Eleanor was struggling to keep quiet, but we'd rehearsed this carefully. She was playing the role of the grieving mother who'd accepted her husband's guilt. I want to help you start over, I told Rebecca. Eleanor and I talked about it. We want to give you $200,000 from our retirement savings. Consider it our way of making amends for the pain we caused Tim. Rebecca's performance was flawless. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice cracked with apparent gratitude. You don't have to do that. Just knowing you understand what happened means everything to me. But I want to, I insisted. Tim would want me to take care of you. You're still our daughter, and daughters deserve to be supported by their fathers. That's when Rebecca made her first mistake. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was relief that her plan had worked perfectly, but she got careless and started revealing her true feelings. You know, Harry, I have to admit something. The last few months have been easier in some ways. Tim was so stressed all the time, so worried about work, about pleasing you, about everything. It was exhausting to watch him suffer like that. Now that he's at peace, I feel like I can finally breathe and start living my own life. I pushed a little harder. What do you mean by that? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, visibly more relaxed now. Tim was always so intense about everything, always worried about security at work, about protecting our family, about doing the right thing. He even started acting paranoid toward the end, like he thought someone was watching us or following us around. The stress was literally destroying his heart. Literally? I asked carefully. She nodded with apparent sadness. His heart just couldn't take the pressure anymore. Dr. Pierce said it was like his body had been under constant attack for months. Sometimes I think his death was almost a mercy, you know. He's not suffering anymore. Eleanor gripped my hand under the table. Rebecca had just admitted on tape that she knew Tim's death was related to months of physical stress, contradicting her earlier claims of sudden, unexpected heart failure. I decided to test her further. Rebecca, can I ask you something personal? I hope this isn't inappropriate. Of course, Dad Harry. You can ask me anything. Are you seeing someone? I mean, I know it's probably too early to think about dating again, but when you're ready, Eleanor and I want you to know we'll support whatever makes you happy. For just a split second, I saw panic flash across Rebecca's face before she recovered. That's so sweet of you to think about my future, but I can never replace Tim. He was the love of my life. Of course, I said gently. But someday, when you're ready, maybe someone like that trainer you mentioned. Kyle, was it? Rebecca froze completely. The color drained from her face, and her hand stopped halfway to her wine glass. Kyle, the personal trainer from your gym. I thought I saw you talking to him at the funeral reception. The silence stretched for 10 full seconds. Rebecca stared at me, and I could practically see her mind racing through possibilities. How much did I know? How had I learned Kyle's name? What other information might I have discovered? She chose poorly. Tim never mentioned any Kyle to you. Then how do I know about him, Rebecca? Another long silence. Rebecca looked around the restaurant nervously, probably calculating her options. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was completely different from before. Colder, more calculating. What exactly are you suggesting, Harry? I'm not suggesting anything, I said calmly. I'm just wondering how a grieving widow ends up with a boyfriend less than 2 months after her husband's funeral. Eleanor played her part perfectly, gasping in apparent shock. Rebecca, you're seeing someone already? How could you? Rebecca's carefully constructed mask finally began to slip. You have no idea what my marriage was really like. Tim was sick for months, getting sicker every day. Do you know what it's like to watch someone you supposedly love wasting away in front of your eyes? So you found comfort with Kyle? I pressed. Kyle understands me in ways Tim never did. Kyle doesn't judge me for wanting to actually live my life instead of tiptoeing around someone else's problems all the time. And Tim's life insurance makes that new life easier, doesn't it? Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her making a critical decision. Then she smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. You're fishing, Harry. You don't actually know anything concrete. I pulled out my phone and played a 10-second audio clip from Tim's hidden recordings. Rebecca's own voice filled our corner of the restaurant. Kyle, baby, it won't be much longer now. Once Tim's dead and I collect the insurance money, we can be together openly. Rebecca went white as a sheet. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal evening bustle, but our table had become a bubble of absolute silence and tension. You want to know what I know? I said quietly. I know you spent 6 months slowly poisoning my son with digitoxin obtained through your pharmaceutical connections. I know you've been planning his murder with your boyfriend since last year. I know you blackmailed Dr. Pierce into signing a false death certificate, and I know you're about to spend the rest of your life in prison. Rebecca looked around frantically, probably thinking about running. But Detective Thompson and 2 uniformed officers were already walking through the restaurant entrance, moving purposefully toward our table. Rebecca Torres Bennett, Detective Thompson announced. You're under arrest for the murder of Timothy Bennett, conspiracy to commit, fraud, and extortion. As they cuffed her, Rebecca finally showed her true self completely. No more tears, no more grieving widow act, no more fake concern for family. She looked at me with pure, undisguised hatred. You're just like Tim said, she hissed. A controlling old man who can't let go of anything. You couldn't control him in life, so now you're trying to control his death. The only thing I'm controlling, I told her as they led her away, is making sure justice gets done for my son. They arrested Kyle Morrison at his apartment 2 hours later. The cocky personal trainer, who thought he could manipulate his way into a fortune, broke down immediately when confronted with the evidence. He confessed to everything within 30 minutes, desperate to cut a deal before the full weight of the case came down on him. Dr. Nathan Pierce turned himself in the next morning after Detective Thompson paid him a visit with copies of Tim's recordings. Pierce's medical license was suspended immediately, and he faced federal charges for his role in the conspiracy. The man who'd been our family physician for 15 years, who delivered Tim when he was born, had helped murder him for money and fear of exposure. The trial became the biggest news story in our city for months. Tim's hidden camera evidence was so comprehensive that the defense attorneys had virtually nothing to work with. Rebecca's own voice planning the murder, Kyle discussing their future with the insurance money, Dr. Pierce explaining how to avoid autopsy detection, all of it captured in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Gerald Coleman, my lawyer, worked with the prosecution to ensure Tim's evidence was presented in the most powerful way possible. The jury watched hours of surveillance footage showing Rebecca systematically poisoning her husband while pretending to care for him. They heard her cold, calculating voice planning his death like a business transaction. The most devastating moment came when they played Tim's final video message in court. The entire courtroom fell silent as my son, pale and dying, looked into the camera and explained how his wife was murdering him. Several jurors were crying openly when the video ended. Rebecca's defense team tried every angle they could think of. They claimed the recordings were fabricated, that Tim had been paranoid and delusional, that Rebecca was the real victim of an abusive marriage. But Tim's evidence was too thorough, too professional, too overwhelming. Every claim the defense made was contradicted by multiple sources of documentation. Kyle Morrison took a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Rebecca. He got 15 years and told the court exactly how they'd planned everything together. Dr. Pierce also pled guilty and received 20 years plus permanent loss of his medical license. Both men were completely broken by the experience, realizing they'd been manipulated by someone much smarter and more ruthless than. They'd understood. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty of extortion. Guilty on every count. Rebecca got life without the possibility of parole. At her sentencing, the judge looked at her with obvious contempt. In my 25 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated malice. You murdered a good man who loved you, then attempted to destroy his grieving parents. You have shown not one moment of genuine remorse. Eleanor and I got Tim's life insurance money returned to us, plus all of Rebecca's inheritance claims were voided permanently. The house Tim had shared with Rebecca, the savings accounts, everything reverted to his estate and ultimately to us as his surviving family. But the money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that Tim's sacrifice had meaning. He'd given his life to protect Eleanor. And me from Rebecca's plans, and his methodical investigation had ensured justice was served. We used the insurance money and our own savings to establish the Timothy Bennett Memorial Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping families investigate suspicious deaths when police resources are limited or when local authorities don't take concerns seriously. We provide funding for private investigators, forensic experts, and legal representation for families who suspect domestic homicide. In the 3 years since Tim's death, our foundation has helped expose 12 cases of murder that were initially ruled natural or accidental deaths. We've saved at least 6 lives by intervening when family members reported suspicious symptoms or behavior patterns similar to what Tim experienced. Every case we solve, every life we save, is Tim's legacy continuing to protect innocent people. Eleanor volunteers at the foundation full-time now. She's become an expert at recognizing the warning signs of domestic poisoning and financial manipulation that often precede murder. Her intuition about Rebecca, which everyone dismissed as grief-induced paranoia, has helped her identify dangerous situations in other families. I still visit Tim's grave every week, usually on Sunday mornings after church. Last week I brought him the newspaper article about our foundation's latest success. We'd helped a family in Ohio prove that their father's heart attack was actually murder by his second wife, who'd been slowly poisoning him for his pension money. Justice served again, son, I told him, just like you taught me. I've learned something important through all this. Being 59 years old doesn't make you too old to fight for what's right, and it doesn't make you too naive to be fooled by people you trust. Age brings experience, professional skills, and a network of allies that younger criminals often underestimate. But it also brings wisdom about when to trust your instincts, even when they contradict what seems obvious. Rebecca thought she could manipulate an old man and his emotional wife. She forgot that this old man had spent 30 years catching killers and fraudsters just like her. She underestimated the power of a father's love and a lifetime of professional training. Most importantly, she underestimated my son, who combined his IT security expertise with the investigative principles I'd taught him to build an unbreakable case against her. Tim saved our lives by documenting Rebecca's crimes, but more than that, he gave us a purpose that will outlast our own mortality. Every family we help through the foundation, every predator we expose, every life we save is proof that love between a father and son doesn't end with death. It transforms into something larger and more powerful than any individual revenge. It becomes a force that protects others from experiencing the same devastating loss. That's the real insight here, the lesson that took me 3 years to fully understand. The strongest revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's making sure their evil dies with them while the good they tried to destroy continues to grow and protect others. Rebecca Torres Bennett will spend the rest of her life in a concrete cell, forgotten by history. But Tim Bennett's name is on a foundation that will save lives for decades to come. In the end, that's not just justice, that's victory.